So I'm going to show you a recipe that is a gluten-free thumbprint cookie that I'm going to fill with some hibiscus pomegranate jam made from chia seeds. And this recipe is something that is kind of near and dear to my heart because a lot of the ingredients actually come from my garden. So I'm happy to share that with you today, and we'll see. I'm going to show you how to get the arils out of the pomegranate, the seeds out of the pomegranate, and make the jam first. And then I'll show you how to make these gluten-free cookies. These cookies are can be made vegan if you substitute a plant-based butter for the butter that I'm going to use. So they're kind of a flexible recipe, but they're great for people who have a lot of food sensitivities. So let me switch my camera so that you can see what I'm going to do with my hands. All right. So first off, the pomegranate is just a really cool fruit. It's kind of unique. You can see that this is actually the flower bud. And so the whole pomegranate is encapsulating all of the seeds inside. So what we're going to do to cut it is just kind of make a square on the top with our paring knife. And this is going to enable us to expose all of these seeds very easily. So we can see what's going on inside here. So we've got this white pith, and the white pith is pretty bitter. So we want to find, we don't want to eat that, but we need to get all of these beautiful red seeds, the arils, out of the pomegranate. So you can see that there's kind of these lines of white pith. So if you take your paring knife and go down the sides where you see the white pith, you won't be cutting through as many of the seeds. And it's going to be a little bit easier to get them out because all of these pomegranates are unique, the way they're formed and their shape. So you can see how that really just comes apart really easily. And so now we can just gently kind of coax the seeds out. I like doing it this way. I've seen a lot of people that will take the pomegranate and bash it, but my kitchen has enough food all over the place. I actually usually do this. You can see it's spraying on the cutting board. I actually usually do this in my sink to get all of the seeds out. So I'll put the bowl in the sink and then just really coax these out into the bowl in the sink. And we can see the beautiful red color on these arils. And whenever we're eating the rainbow, we like to think about red as being protective of the heart. All of the foods that are red, naturally colored foods that are red, have protective compounds and antioxidants in them that are particularly helpful for the heart. And so two of the foods we're using today, the pomegranates as well as the hibiscus, are some of the deepest red colors that we can find in nature. So I really just love using these. All right, so I've already done a bunch of these. You don't need to see me struggle with that much longer. So I have a whole bowl. So the first step is to get some pomegranate juice because the pomegranate juice is going to serve as the flavor for our jam. So to do that, I'm actually just going to use my blender. I'm going to go straight into my blender with the seeds and just blend. And we're going to see that this is going to pretty much just turn into liquid very quickly. So So once you've done that, it doesn't take long in your blender. All you need to do is strain the juice from the little bit of really hard seed that's in the center of these arils. We're looking for about a cup of juice to use in this recipe. And if you can't find pomegranates, or you don't want to, if you want to shortcut this recipe, you can buy pomegranate juice already. But I will tell you, it tastes very different than freshly juiced pomegranates. So we can see this lovely juice that we have. And we've got a little bit that pink color on the top. It's just the air. It's a little bit of foam from the juice. All right, so that's going to go back into our blender. We've gotten most of the seeds out. And you can rinse your blender if you want to, but it's going to be good enough. All right, so now the next thing we need is our beautiful hibiscus flowers. So I'm lucky enough to be growing hibiscus flowers in my front garden. And so these are the ornamental type of hibiscus, which are also edible. So what I do when I harvest these is I take out this part of the flower, right? That's got the pollen, and this is the stamen of the flower, because I just really want to use the petals. So I also take this part off of the flower. And then I need about, when I'm using fresh flowers like this, I need about 2 ounces of fresh flowers. And this is just going to go into my juice. And I'm going to blend it up a little bit more. So we've got a fairly chunky consistency. But everything is pretty much combined, right? This is a jam. This isn't a jelly. So we're looking for some chunks of things in that jam. All right, and so now we've got our pan. And so I'm going to put this in a pan. And we're going to heat it to thicken it, but we're also going to add some some chia seeds. Chia seeds are really going to help thicken this, keep it more jam-like, and they're going to add some omega-3 fatty acids to the jam. And we're not going to use any pectin or other things that are traditionally used to make jams, because we don't need them for this chia jam, right? The seeds are, they have the mucous membrane when they get wet, so they're mucilaginous. And so they're going to be really good for our gut health. They're going to coat our stomach and our intestines and cool a lot of inflammation, in addition to having those omega-3 fatty acids. So I'm going to stir about 1.5 tablespoons of seeds. In here. And then I want to put a little bit of sweetness as well. So I'm just going to use some honey, but I'm going to wait to add my honey until this starts to thicken a little bit. So it's already fairly thick, right? And the seeds will thicken it more. But just to really get everything combined, It's nice to heat it. It kind of speeds the process of the seeds expanding, the chia seeds, that is. And then I'm going to add my honey as a sweetener. So the honey that I have is local honey. And this particular brand is also raw and unfiltered, so that you're going to have a little bit more of the compounds that are really good for, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, but the compounds that are really good for antibacterial properties in this honey, which you don't have as much when you are using honey that's been heated, right? So this is not been heated. That's what makes it a raw product. This is also from SoCal, Southern California, where I am. So this is also, honey can be really great if you have seasonal allergies, because you're taking like small doses of the pollen that you are in your area and in your air, and it's kind of like getting a flu shot, right? You get a little tiny bit of that compound that's going to make you sick, but then your body builds up immunity to it. So I'm going to add about a tablespoon of honey, then we can taste and adjust a little bit more. But this jam really goes quickly. You really only need to heat it until it kind of is boiling, in a sense. And we can see that's already starting to happen. All right, so that's going to be pretty good. And then this is going to need, you can see I don't know if you can see the steam coming out, right? The water is evaporating. We can kind of pull on the pan and we can see that the jam separates. So we know that this is in pretty good shape, just to kind of taste and see how it's doing. Now for me, that's perfect. I don't want it to be overly sweet. I can definitely taste the honey. I'm going to turn this off. And so what you would do with this jam is then you'll just put it into a jar and let it cool. And so we've got our pomegranate hibiscus jam that we're going to use in our cookies. And I'm going to set that aside until we need it. So I did want to show you, in case you don't have hibiscus in your yard and you want the benefits of all of those anthocyanins, right? Those red colors in your life. One of the things you can do is you can buy hibiscus tea. It comes like this, just in tins or jars. And these are the dried blossoms. This is a different variety than the variety I used. So it's a little bit more bitter, but it is used to make tea. So what you would do is you'll take about an ounce of these and you pour boiling water over them. And that water, you strain these out, and that water is hibiscus tea. It's actually a pretty bitter tea. And then you save that and you drink tea. But what you would use for this recipe are the edible flowers that are left over. So these actually have already been soaked in hot water and are now, you can see how they're wet and they're pliable. And this is what you would grind into your pomegranate juice. So it's an excellent source for heart protection of a natural food that you can use. One of the things that you can look up is you can look up the research with hibiscus and high blood pressure. They find that people who drink 3 cups of hibiscus tea every day can naturally lower their blood pressure. So it's a very, very powerful food. It is Also, one of those things, though, that you don't want to have too much of. So you can't go overboard. 3 cups is the max that is recommended for anyone to drink a day of hibiscus tea. All right, so that is our jam. And that is we're gonna let that cool for maybe 20, 30 minutes. Then it would go in the refrigerator. So I have already made pre-made jam as well for these cookies because this will be too hot to use right away. All right, so what's next? So now let's talk about our cookies. So what's the foundation of cookies? Usually butter or fat of some sort. So you could do these cookies, as I said, with butter. You can do them with vegan butter. You can even try it if you're really controlling your temperatures, you can do it with coconut oil. So because we need a saturated fat, right? So saturated fat is solid at room temperature. That's what makes it saturated. But one of the things we've done to this butter is we have let it come to room temperature so that we can cream it. And creaming is a process of putting air into something, whether it's butter or honey. It's just adding air. So this process of creating these pockets of air, which are a natural leavener, right, to make things light, to add some height to your baked goods. You want to add air to them. And we can do this with yeast. We often use yeast in breads, or we'll use fermentation, where we'll have creating the natural yeast in the air to make a sourdough bread, or you can do it with carbonation. If you ever heard of like an Irish soda bread, they'll be using that carbonation. But we're going to do it mechanically, which means we're going to take the air that's right here and we're going to put it into the butter with a hand mixer. And this process can take a little time. So so you just want to be patient with it. But if you do it too long, the butter will get too hot and it will melt. I'm going to add my honey as well here. And I'm just going to scrape everything down because we want to get that butter off the side of the bowls. So the ideal room temperature is 65 degrees. So if you keep your house warmer than 65 degrees, then you will need to make sure you get to your butter before it gets up to over 65 degrees. Because when it gets to about 70 degrees, it'll start melting. And this is a small batch recipe. I made this a small batch recipe on purpose because sometimes we don't want to overindulge in our sweets. But if you want to double this recipe, it does double. Right now I'm only using 3 tablespoons of butter and 3 tablespoons of honey. You can see I'm stopping, I'm scraping down, but we really want that air to get incorporated. And the more air you add, the more cookies you'll get from your recipe. So if you've ever had a recipe where you're like, hey, they said it was going to give me 12 cookies and I only got, 10. Well, you probably didn't cream your butter long enough because the air takes up space. So essentially right now we're just making honey butter as well. So this is how you would make honey butter. Mix butter and honey. There's a lot of things you can mix with butter. Garlic for garlic butter. Right, that's looking pretty good. So we can see that it's kind of fluffier. And this is a small amount of butter, so it's not taking quite as long as if you had more butter. But I don't want to get it too hot because the honey is also going to bring the temperature up on the butter. All right, so the next step is to mix our dry ingredients together. So for this recipe, I'm using cassava flour. Cassava is the yucca root that they grind. This keeps it gluten-free because it's a root, not a grain. So you're going to want to you could use cassava flour, and then this is almond flour that I've packed into the cup because that's what I found. I need that much almond flour. So I'm actually just going to mix the cassava with a little bit of salt and add my almond flour and mix those together, which I need a bigger bowl. So the almond flour, right, is a non-traditional flour. It's just ground up almonds that have been blanched. Blanched almonds have their skin removed. If you don't remove the skin on the almonds, you have almond meal. So you could use either in this recipe, but just be aware of the difference because you might get a little bit of a different texture. All right, so the salt is combined, and now I'm just going to slowly add a little bit at a time into my butter mixture. Kind of slowly incorporating it. Now, almond flour is super dense. So you also just need to be aware of that. This is a shortbread style of cookie. If you wanted to make this a sugar cookie, you would add an egg. If you think you have melted your butter for some reason, adding an egg a cold egg from the refrigerator can really help to cool down your butter again. But it does make a different texture for the cookie. And it's really important to slowly add this a little bit at a time. If you put it all in at once, it just turns more into a pie crust. All right. So now we have our dough for our cookies. And they're ready to go onto our pan. So I'm going to use a cookie scoop, so I get even amounts and all my cookies are the same size. But this recipe makes about 8 or 9 cookies, depending on how tightly you packed it, how long you creamed your butter. So there's a lot of variation. A lot of recipes have variation, right? Cooking times have variation because the equipment we're using, if I used a stand mixer versus a hand mixer, how much air would get put into that butter is going to vary. Or if I creamed it by hand, which is possible, they've creamed by hand for many, many years. But you can see this made about 9, right? 3 rows of 3. 3 times 3 is 9. All right, so now let's work with these. So I try not to do too much to these cookies because like I said, they are gluten-free, and so they're a little bit more finicky as far as how they'll crumble. But I'm just going to now push each one of them down. I'm going to use some parchment paper and just flatten them. And, we're looking for contact to the parchment paper. You have tried to bake cookies without parchment paper. You could also use a silicone baking sheet, but it makes such a difference in the way your cookies brown. So anything I roast, actually, I use parchment paper, but even vegetables, because it makes such a huge difference. All right, and so now to do the thumbprints, we could use our thumb. That's okay. But you could also use the back of a measuring spoon to make them look more uniform. Almost there. We just got to put our jam in, and then we'll have some thumbprint cookies. Oh, and I'm looking over at my mise en place tray. Guess what? I forgot my almond extract. Make sure you don't forget your almond extract. It makes these even more almondy and delicious. All right, and so then we're just going to take a little bit of our jam and put it into each cookie. So it's a very, assembly line kind of operation. And that's all you do. And then you do all of them. And then you put them in the oven, and then whoop, they come out 10 minutes later on your tray, nicely baked and ready to eat. I did not forget the almond extract in this batch. But what we're looking for is this nice browning color, right? We do have to be careful using almond flour because this will go from perfectly toasty to perfectly burnt in 5 seconds. So just make sure you're not really walking away from these cookies. But they do have, they hold together pretty well. They're a pretty solid cookie. The jam is also holding together pretty well, but let me turn this back to the other camera so that you can see me. All right, so let's give these a taste with the jam. I'm telling you, delicious. Where's my coffee? I'm having some decaf. But there really are a shortbread cookie. So a shortbread cookie is very sandy in texture, and that's the intention of these cookies. If you don't like that sandy cookie, like I said, just add an egg to the recipe and you'll get more of a sugar cookie. You'll have a little bit more of a crunch and less of that sandy shortbread cookie.